Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. And today we have a great episode. It is a feature length episode, so it runs to about 45 minutes. So I will warn you, you will need coffee. We don't have brands of coffee we can sell you. However, stay away from instant. That stuff is horrible. Anyway, if you're listening to this, it's probably because you're really interested in having a great career, building a successful and lasting career. And we've just found that people aren't necessarily always getting the employability skills that we would like them to have as an employer. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're talking about. That's why we're here. Today, we've got a great feature length episode with a dear friend of mine and a university professor, Mike, and he's very kindly sat down with me, and I've pushed him and picked at him and asked some difficult questions and some stupid questions at times. But there's some really useful insights that have come out of this conversation. And I think that if you are going to uni, or you're thinking of going to uni, or you're partway through uni, or you've graduated and you're not quite sure why you can't get the job you want, I think this is definitely worth a really just listen to it basically, because it's gonna open up lots of questions in your mind, and hopefully, if you've not gone to uni yet, it's gonna make you think about whether you're choosing the right course. Because I think when you listen to this interview and you listen to this conversation, you'll end up with a few more questions yourself, and that's a great thing, because when you go to your open days, you can really push lecturers and you can push the people trying to sell you these degrees, and you can say, well, am I going to get a return on investment? Show me the data on the people who've got a job. I mean, this week I was reading about someone who has got a job in Topshop, and that has been classed by their university as a job in fashion. So questioning things is tricky at times, but it's good and it's fun, and that's what we're doing in this short interview now. We're having some fun and we're picking away at things. I hope it helps. Enjoy it. So could you please introduce yourself, your job, your title, and just a bit about your experience, please?
Well, at the moment, I guess for the next 2 weeks, I'm Professor of Marketing at the University of Bath, and I've worked there for since January 2010. So I guess as a professional, I'm kind of speaking as an employee of the University of Bath, but I'm there for another 2 weeks, and then I go back to Melbourne, Australia, where I take up a professorship in marketing at RMIT University. I've been in higher education since 1993, and I've worked at various institutions: University of Auckland, University of Melbourne, Monash University, University of Bath. So, and in various roles, everything from a tutor through to a lecturer through to a professor, and in various institutions, including those that claim to be very work-ready focused, very employability focused, very pragmatically focused, through to those that would probably argue that they are more, classically academically focused.
So, am I right in saying that the best time to talk to you would be in 2 weeks and 1 day?
No, I think just I'll say this as a professional who's been, whatever I say is really just taken, I think, as a professional who's been in the sector for a long time at different places, and rather than commenting perhaps on individual programs, for individual institutions.
Well, first bit of context here. Mike and I know each other through our local specialty coffee shop, and we've actually just done an interview on my experiences there. Mike was kind enough to bring myself up to the university, and we did a big project on sunflower about 2 years ago now, where I did a presentation to around, I'd say it was about 150, 200 students from all around the world, and they really deconstructed what I was about, where I'd come from in my journey. And then a couple of months later, they all presented back in groups what they thought Sunflower's brand could be, and what they could see, which maybe I couldn't, based upon all of the experiences I'd had and what we were trying to offer to customers, and the quality we were trying to pass over and the value we were trying to pass over. And that was a really, really great experience for me and a great process, and I learned a lot, and that's influenced the brand and many decisions I've made since then. And I think that key word there for me was process, and that was a well-managed process, and that was beneficial to me as a process. And I think that why I personally had good professional experiences and opportunities was because I was taught quite young about the power of process and also the power of employability skills, something we've struggled with whilst we've tried to recruit. Mike, when I talk about the employability skills issues we've had, what do you think about this?
I mean, it's interesting because over the years at various institutions, you keep hearing this. You keep hearing it coming back to, at a very strange basic level, we really just need people who can kind of read and write and communicate, which you think, okay, sure, but you know, there's more to it than that, right? I mean, there's it's not to discount, I think, wholly the kind of specialist skills, because otherwise I think universities would be out of business. Certainly business schools would be. So I think there's been a constant sort of pushback from industry, talking about, you know, we need graduates who are more employable. But when they talk about that, if they're specific at all, it tends to then move into either complaints about some fairly standard things that quite often sometimes reflect the internationalisation of the sector, and that we have graduates who, their English language skills aren't as good as they should be. We have some local graduates who fall into that camp a lot as well. When I think companies that have had longer relationships with particular universities might sort of come back, they tend to be a bit more specific. So they'll talk about things like having, you know, just really having, you know, the get up and go to come in here and muck in and, you know, get your hands dirty, to do things that, you know, might be out of what you see your status. So some of the things you were talking about before, some of the basic admin things, getting coffee, all the stuff that actually even professors will do, you know, just to make things actually work. We're not, you know, very few of us have got any airs and graces in that regard. And, you know, things like managing multiple projects at once to the same deadline. Things like, you know, just being able to do something a bit different with a standard thing. So there's a value in someone coming in new with a different perspective. On the one hand, they want the benefit of that perspective. On the other hand, they also, I think, are perhaps disappointed with, you know, some of the things that you point out, which is, you know, their inability to, or their lack of, I guess, you know, appreciation for doing multiple things at once. And this is in many ways the generation that is supposed to be good at multitasking, but we know in reality that it's not actually correct. So, you know, I think those are the types of things that come down to it. You know, can they hit the ground running, and can they do some of the soft stuff that I guess we may not necessarily, we certainly wouldn't teach in class, you know, unless it was someone like myself that has a lot of experience of industry and of education, where you're teaching a group of students where you want to say, this is real life, and this is how we want to put some kind of confines around you, so that you then deliver something that is actually really creative, but actually is also really useful.
You spoke about soft skills there. Would you see those as the sort of the basics, the turning up on time, the attention to detail, the spell checking? Is that what you'd describe as the kind of category, the basic employability elements? Because we've spoken to different people who, you know, lecturers and college professionals and sometimes parents and certainly students as well say, oh yeah, we used to have classes on those, but I never used to go, etc., etc. Now, these are specific cases, but when I look to the 50 people we've tried to employ, and I look at the standard of English amongst English applicants, and I look at the attention to detail, and I look at the desire and the actual sort of thoroughness, I'm just not seeing it. I just haven't seen it in 98% of the cases. Now, what happens when you're in business? Other business operators or owners say to you, well, you're looking for the 2%. Well, my concern is, well, what about these other 98%, the ones who I have seen who have been out for a year? They've spent the 45,000 on the degree, and they still don't know what they don't know. So they're getting to the doors of people like me, and they can do a good day's camera work, but they can't invoice for it because they don't know how to format an invoice. And the process of invoicing us becomes a kind of 10-step folly, where they're falling over themselves to ask basic questions or send in files that don't work, etc. And when you times that across, say, 10 employability skills, so the fact that they couldn't find parking
Yeah.
And we had to then sort of stop what we were doing to, get up our Google map and stuff. You get into this issue of value being taken away from our small company and therefore from the larger companies. I think small skills are so important. The idea I'm getting is that these are possibly being missed along the chain. Would you agree with that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the pitch is really complicated, right? And I know that's probably a really lazy standard academic answer, but I think firstly, I think universities are geared more towards the big end of town than the small entrepreneurial company, when it comes to business graduates
That's interesting.
or to perhaps other graduates. I think they kind of think you're either in your industry and where I used to teach in Melbourne, fashion, for example, there would be, I think those people, they know they're going to go out and start their own kind of company. And I think they kind of rely on them being extremely good at making great, exciting clothes. I'm not so sure how much experience they get on all the other things. I think big companies tend to sort of have a little bit more slack in the system. Someone's going to do the invoicing. It isn't going to be even the graduate. There'll be a system in place. Someone will proof the work, or you'll get a bollocking for not proofing and polishing the work. Like, there'll be things there that I think when we gear ourselves towards, we perhaps don't hear about. We perhaps don't hear about it because certainly the University of Bath, we have very good graduates. So we wouldn't expect at the undergraduate level to have these issues. You do hear it about the postgraduates, where you start to get the international factor kick in, and that limits their employability. But that's a different thing. I think the other thing that's difficult is universities are kind of pulled multiple ways, right? I mean, on the one hand, sure, employers are a stakeholder, a very important stakeholder, but there's a whole culture of academia that would say, we're not really here just to skill people for industry alone. That's either what polytechnics did, it's what apprenticeships did. There's also, we're receivers of graduates, so we sort of expect schools to do some things, and then and perhaps they don't do it as well as they should. I don't know. Then we've also got the student body, which is increasingly now as a customer. You mentioned £45,000, but that's them putting money down on the promise of getting that back. Universities are quite clear that that's a good investment, and so there's a reluctance, I think, necessarily to, on the one hand, because of the university being an academy, to say, we're gonna train you with these really basic level how-to type skills, because that's not who we are. There's the flip side of that, say, well, the student's also the customer, so there's a certain amount of give we've got to do that in a way I think takes away from them experiencing where I think they should be experiencing some of those skills. So I don't think there's a room for classrooms and this stuff. I think that doesn't really work. I think it has to be embedded in how we approach things, and that goes two ways. It means staff have to start doing some of the things, and most staff do, but there are some places where it gets let down. So I don't think the students really experience those things. So there is a culture of, well, there are extensions to assignments, mitigating circumstances, and I would say with the exception of certainly the University of Bath, often you can drive a truck through mitigating circumstances in terms of what they can have to have another extension or another delay or another crack at something. A lot of these things are kind of seen as it's okay to do it. I think also the students aren't always on the kind of treadmill, so to speak. So let's take your parking example. So if they struggle with parking or the buses are late, okay, then they might miss a class. But they can make that up, usually by online, because we've provided it for those types of things. And it's not necessarily going to affect, whether their assessment, for example, because there's no requirement necessarily to turn up to class. So I think we're kind of pulled in different ways, and I don't think anyone sat down and said, instead of saying this is tricky and this is difficult, how do we kind of solve that problem and produce something that's useful for everyone? Because I think there was certainly a case for the student rights agenda, but then it got pulled too far, and now it's actually not doing those students any favours.
It's an interesting point you pull up there about how obviously when maybe students miss a class or they miss a deadline, the system shifts for them to keep them in the game essentially, because ultimately they're chasing that qualification and that kind of closure of that piece of academic work. In business, the shift doesn't happen, and I've experienced that on both a sort of a real level in terms of the issues that then causes us when someone shifts. It might be they miss their bus or they that shifts what we're doing. That shifts our client, and there's that knock on. However, we can't adjust in the same way as an institution because of the restrictions we have on us. Now, do you think that the deal in terms of students paying over that money is clear enough about along the lines of, I pay for a mortgage for a house, I get a house. And so if I pay for a degree and the process of a degree, and the lines are shifted to the point where that degree doesn't represent the reality of the working world, and therefore I become unemployable because I'm not used to the rigors and the plates of life. I'm essentially being given a disservice. Do you think that there's a risk of that is happening, and that lots of people might be going out into the world with too many movable components within the graduate world, which is beneficial to a point because it gives them freedom and time to explore and learn, but is, as we've experienced, way off the realities of what we need and what, I'm a small company now as a small business owner, but ITN as well, where I was a huge employer. Increasingly, employers like this are becoming staff on demand, so they're looking for more sort of self-starting people, and we are speaking to people who are 3 years into a degree or going into their third year. They're about to spend another 9,000, and they're using phrases like, we don't know what employers want, and we're being taught skills which would have been useful 5 years ago, but in the digital world moving forwards, we know are redundant, and they can't get here on time. They can't understand why it's important they're not here on time. They speak 3 languages. They're spending the money, but they have a real disconnect from the reality of what it's going to be like. And also, furthermore, a lot of these people aren't being taught how to get out there and sell themselves. And they're being sent out into a world which is increasingly becoming more self-employed. What do you think about that, Mike?
Well, there's a lot of issues in this. I think I'll take them as I can remember them. But I think the first one is that I think one of the things that a lot of businesses miss is that we're also a business. And I know there'll be a lot of my colleagues that will kind of, argue against that. But there is a business aspect to the university. So in many cases, some of these slippages or this slack we have is because we want the student to progress. That doesn't mean we necessarily want them. We're sort of giving them grades easily and grade inflation, because that's certainly not been my experience in the UK. It has been elsewhere, but not in the UK. And I think it's more about, sometimes they get separate chances to redo and pass with the minimum mark, because it makes financially more sense for us to move them on than have them stuck in the old way, which is a fail was a fail, and you redo it for as long as you have to redo it.
Because that would cost the university
more
money.
It would just cost the university money, and when they've started to look at the operational cost of that, it's quite significant. And so there are systems built in that give people extra chances before the boot them out decision, is because it actually financially makes sense. The old system, in a way, was more brutal, but on the other hand, it just cost a fortune.
And does the student know that? Do they know that they've been moved on because it's become financially?
No, I don't think they do, but I think they know that ultimately, if they get a resit, for example, so say a student fails, they may have to redo it, but they can only get the bare minimum pass, which then ultimately can affect the quality of their degree classification. So, these things are not done lightly. And increasingly, I think there has been the removal from the individual academic to give extensions on assignments, which I think is again, a lot of my colleagues don't like. I love it because it now means that actually there's a system in place to give this, and it gets a lot stricter. So, there isn't necessarily some of that slack that you think. I think the issue around skills is, yes, some of the technical skills can very easily become obsolete. But I think the things that you're wanting are the things that don't become obsolete. And I think that's our missed opportunity. And it comes back to how we balance this kind of the atmosphere that we want at a university, which is about experimentation and about freedom and about, them being adults and treated as adults, which is something we always say at university. And then also, I think, being fair to them and equipping them with the realities of the workplace. And so that would mean, and I come at this primarily from someone who teaches in the business studies area, it does mean, I think, us getting a little bit stricter around things like, you make meetings with your professors. You don't, and you arrive on time. You don't arrive late. If you arrive late, that might be too bad. Some people do that and enforce that. Some people don't. The people that enforce it don't actually get a lot of complaints, and as long as they do a great job in class, usually get very good teaching scores. So I think a lot of the myths we hear about, well, if you did that, you'd really get a bad teaching rating. I think no. I think there's more to it than that. I think some of the things about creating, work scenarios, like I do in my own class, where it's like, well, this is what you would get in industry as a brief. Now go away and do it. And these are the rules I'm going to set down, are instructive and don't limit actual people's creativity. In fact, they demand a lot more out of those creative skills, a lot more to do it. I think we're less comfortable with some of those things, and I'd like to see a bit more of that come back into the system, where there is a little bit more of this kind of the types of things that businesses are asking for, but it's lived. It's not taught. It's just lived.
I've got two final questions, because I know you're a busy man, and you're also heading off to Australia in a few days, or to Berlin. I'm off to France myself tomorrow, so we're both busy boys. But I mean, one of your specialisms is brand, and that's how we know each other. And you've helped extensively with Sunflower's brand and with some other businesses local, and that's been great. And this is a phrase I hate, but personal brand has become a phrase that we've seen more and more in the last few years, especially now with all the different platforms, LinkedIn, etc. You can't scroll through without seeing an article about brand and personal brand. And whether you like that phrase or not, or whether people like that phrase or not, I mean, I think what Small Steps, Big Leaps, 50 employability skills for media life, for professional life, is trying to get across that actually those core employability skills are your personal brand that are transferable, and you take those with you into every single situation. And in my case, it's those virtues and values and small things, small steps, which get me the flights and the helicopters and get me the big contracts with the big companies, etc., etc. It's less and less the quality of my work, because frequently I'll have convinced someone on what we're offering before they've even seen the work. And I just wonder whether there's this point around people going through school, college, university, whatever it might be, apprenticeships, without an understanding that if they are 5 minutes late or 15 minutes late, what they've essentially done is they've taken their personal brand, love the phrase or hate the phrase, and they've diminished it by 1% or 0.5%. And every time they do that, it goes down and down and down. And where your specialist knowledge might be going up 50, 60, 70, 80% in your mind. And that's what we see. We see a lot of people who are saying, I'm great at making a program, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. And we're like, but you're consistently late. And then you get into, so then you get into the making excuses. And these are nice people, but we see them time and time and time again, because, okay, maybe university gave them too much freedom. Maybe they didn't go to university and they had too much freedom. We're not trying to knock that. I'm just trying to get to the point of, it feels increasingly like people aren't being told, look, you're diminishing your personal brand every single time you don't do one of these basic employability skills things. I don't care how good your showreel is. If you don't have attention to detail and you can't spell check or send it off to someone to spell check, that's more important to a company big or small, than how flashy you think you are. And so I guess my second to last question would be, what would you like to see changed within the university experience, knowing what you know from businesses who have expressed these problems? And it's not just me. It's a bit, it's being expressed certainly across the country. From what I understand, the businesses I talk to and from the media that we look into and I look into across the spectrum of journals, what would you like to see change to help those students?
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of the personal brand kind of logic, but I think that's more of perhaps how it's misused professionally in my own area of specialty. I mean, I understand.
Do you agree with the point that if people are, say, lacking employability skills, they're diminishing their personal?
Well, yes, I do, and I think what's interesting is what it comes down to is, I mean, the people that are real, for want of a better word, assholes in the workplace that get away with it, that their specialty, their technical ability is usually off the scale. So we tolerate, so that the fashion designer, the amazing film person, we tolerate it because they have something that no one else has. I think the vast majority of the students that we're talking about, that 98%, I mean, the technical ability is the point of, is not a point of differentiation, right? It's just what you need to come to the marketplace. So I think at the moment, those other points of differentiation, raw talent, genuine insight, but then all the other things that you've mentioned are really points of difference. And I think it's a wake-up call in a way to say that some of the things you're talking about are really points of difference, because they're just, to me, that they are so important, but on another level they're so trivial in a sense. As a brand expert, it's like turning up on time. They're just such basic hygiene factors, but therefore it's interesting they seem to be missing. And so I think what I would like to see is universities have a lot more kind of a bit more reflection about what graduate profiles should be in different disciplines, and then how we deliver that, and do it in a branded way, in a sense. The branding logic that I guess I've taught you is it's not about just what the customer wants. It's also about what would make, what would be different to what the customer's currently provided. And it's also about what we can honestly deliver. And so I don't think business just wants people that can do the things you mentioned, but they do want those things.
Well, they're the foundation.
Yeah, and I think we need to grapple with that. And I think we need to then say, well, how do we? The solution is not another class. There's nothing that frustrates me more than walking past classrooms and there's social media for executive education or essay writing for it's kind of like, oh, come on, I mean that doesn't work. That pigeonholing of knowledge, it gets remembered, it gets forgotten. I think I'd like to see it much more embodied. So I think that there's kind of like a student charter where there's a set of expectations that goes beyond plagiarism and all of these things to some of the things that we talk about. And then the flip side of that is if we say that's what's required, so you're required to turn up to class, you're required to do X, Y, and Z, we've got to make sure that we give them a reason to actually turn up to class and excite them and so on. So it goes both ways, I think. And I think I'd like to see that so that we're more comfortable in saying to people, if I use an analogy, I mean, and it's a bad analogy, but if you want to go and work for a top chef, for example, you'll put up with a lot of crap. Just the coffee shop we were talking about, you're going to put up with Max riding you all the time because you want to be the best you can possibly be. And I think universities are entitled, I think, to say, well, we're a good institution. You're going to come here and we're going to set some rules in place. And actually within those rules, we're doing that not to be mean and not to be nasty and not to be snooty and pretentious. We're doing it because it's going to actually really help you.
It's leveraging you up.
Yeah. And
is that lacking?
I think it is. I think there are all of the things that I talk about in terms of graduate profiles and expectations, and even training around, personal branding, which is really about how to write a CV and present yourself, and it's very standardized. But I think it doesn't get lived every day, and I think if it's a bit like learning a language, right? I mean, I've taken classes in French, and when I go to France, I can remember a bit of it, and I can follow conversations. But without speaking French every day, it's hopeless, right? And I think that's the disconnect at the moment, that there's not a little bit of a kind of lived discipline around some of these things that would be really beneficial without stifling the very real experience of what a university should be as well.
Right, there's some really interesting points there, and I think that the one you spoke to about when you mentioned about the these can be really great things to help you stand out. So, for example, when I think of my new role as a business owner, and people are calling me an entrepreneur, etc., and I was nominated for an award, etc., last year. It's just me having a clock face of skills that have been built up over time.
Yeah.
And the more I invest in like lifelong learning, and like, okay, I'm a bit weak on this area, the area of law, for example.
Yeah.
So now there's like weekly meetings with a solicitor training me on how to construct a contract, etc., and how to think from a legal framework when it comes to creative work, etc. That work has to be done. Those books have to be read. That time has to be put in. I guess in a way people could say, well, you're lucky if you've connected with a passion. I'd rather not be up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning doing that work.
Yeah.
But when I'm in that negotiation with that client for that 50 grand contract in 2 weeks' time or a month's time, and I've got that one seed of knowledge, it's life-changing information. And for me, as dull as it sounds, employability skills are that secret weapon. They're that point of differentiation, because the 16-year-old kid who works in a chip shop but is a brilliant employee and has a passion for film is of much greater value to me currently than a media student who spent 3 years having the freedom of university, getting a YouTube channel together and making 500 videos and getting all his friends to like it and share it, and thinking he's going to be the next Spielberg online, but can't turn up on time because there's no value in it to me. And I just feel like, if people want to be successful on whatever part of the spectrum there is, then you need that holistic clock face approach. And that means your employability skills are understood and they're rock solid. And what you don't know, you ask, or you research and you study. Your subject knowledge is always being added to your presentation skills, etc., your personal branding or your own brand for your company. They're all being added to through trial and error.
Yeah.
And that's what can get you to where you want to be. We're not seeing that with attitudes. We're seeing, I've already done it and there it is online, or here it is from my uni work. Why do I need to sit and listen to someone, kind of like you just said, ride over us?
Yeah.
Because I can go onto LinkedIn and I can find a better opportunity in another company and I can design my life and I can switch. And that's frequently what happens. We see people come in, they skip the surface if they even get that far.
Yeah.
And then they jump around on LinkedIn for 6 months. And then all of a sudden you see them back kind of in a position not related because they just need to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And there's no one solution to that. But I do find it worrying that those people then have that bill, and that wasn't being drilled into them at college and then early years of university, because in a way it can feel like a mis-selling.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, and these are just my views, but be interesting to hear what you think, it does seem like we're moving more into a period of self-employment and staff on demand, and technology is having a big impact on that. And if you're not skilled up to the teeth on the basics, there's going to be less opportunity. So I was with some colleagues from ITN recently, who've been at ITN for a number of years, and they said, it's a completely different place when you were there. It's staff on demand. There's the core teams down the middle, and it's a staff on demand model. People get pulled in. So if you're not the strongest or being the strongest editor, but an editor who knows to reply to the email with great English, then you're not getting that interview. You're not even you're getting one opportunity of that. You're getting one swing, and it. Yeah, we could talk all day about this, and I could quiz you all day. And I'm not trying to knock anyone's side. I'm just trying to unpick the picture for people listening to this who maybe are thinking of going to uni or have graduated and aren't quite sure why they're not getting through the door. Finally, are we making work ready individuals in the majority of the cases?
I think it depends. And to kind of respond to what you've said too, I think it really depends on the discipline and even the institution. You know, I think one of the problems is even the institutions that historically, you know, one of the institution I'm going back to work for has both a polytechnic and a university side. So you get a kind of a lot of experience about different ways in which different parts of the institution work. Their experience that they draw on is often something from the past. And so when they set up and say what makes someone work ready, it's often a reflection of what would make them work ready, you know, if they have industry experience. And as you've said, that of course is always a moving target, right? And so I don't think big institutions are very good at creating people who are ready to go out and start businesses. You know, that tends to be, they'd like to think they were, but the reality is when you look at the stats, that's really not the norm, right? The norm is that people go out, they get a job, and we prefer them to get a job with a big name, good company, because that reflects very positively on us. And then maybe at some point, 10 years down the track, they come and do an executive MBA, and that's when they've had that life-changing moment. They go off and they start something themselves. So they've kind of had the discipline drilled into them at that point. And you're trying to give them kind of the drive and the secret skills that they don't quite have to put everything together, that lifelong learning, so to speak, because they've become a specialist and now they need to be a generalist.
Do you think we encourage lifelong learning, or do you think, I mean, I remember, this is maybe a silly example, but I used to love sports day at primary school, and sports day was about running as fast as you could on the 100-metre track and trying to beat your buddies and win that medal. And I, you know, I'm short ass and I'm slow, and, you know, I'd run it in like 15 seconds, and, you know, friends were running it in like 11.5, you know. But it was great. Competition was brilliant. And then in the last year, they made it non-competitive, and it was all about, they stripped out all of the compatibility, and it was all about sort of working in groups and running around in circles and collecting straws and all of the all of that kind of individual, I want to do as well, if not better than my friends, but I want my friends to come with me, I want us all to win, kind of went. And I just wonder whether there's a competition element lacking in university, because the graduates I see frequently are self-congratulating, lacking in the reality of the understanding of the real industry, as opposed to the online, you know, put on a funny video, get 1 million likes, and some people are making advertising revenue off of that. They're not coming to us talking about the power of film and the ability to tell stories. They're coming and they're saying, we want to make YouTube videos, get 1 million subscribers, and then live off the ad revenue.
Right.
And, you know, the Small Steps, Big Leads has been designed for lots of industries and helping people with their employability skills. But we are focusing on the media at the moment because that's the background of myself. And those are worrying things that you hear as well. And I just wonder whether there is a lack of competition, and that whether what we should be doing is encouraging people to be competing within their careers online. In a kind, you know, Facebook in a way. If you think of Facebook is a kind of, it's a sort of social reassurance tool, and it's a bit of a competition tool. You look at Facebook throughout this month of August that we're in, and, you know, people are posting their holidays, and no one's trying to show off on my timeline, but people are saying, here's what I'm doing, and we all do it. But that kind of does, on some level, for me as a user of that software, that platform, say, oh, well, you know, Adam's taking pilot lessons. Oh, look, there's a helicopter. I'm going to get a photo of me next to that helicopter in the middle of the Highlands. And I just wonder whether the competition element is there amongst studies, and whether it's right to be there, whether we should have more of a social kind of competition going on, but in a way which is for each other and for society.
Well, okay. I mean, look.
From the inside, is there a competition element?
Well, I mean, because there's a lot of things being conflated here, right? So that some of the stuff you're talking about is really just status games, and to me, there's way too much status competition, you know, across the board, right? I just don't. I mean, I think a lot of it's so meaningless, and it actually works against, I think, better outcomes. You know, I think this absolute concern with grades, I've seen really stifle creativity and stifle perhaps the preparedness to take risks, the realization that you can stretch yourself into an uncomfortable area and do amazing work, because at the end of the day, yeah, the work was amazing, but it had some flaws, and therefore your grade fell a bit. The focus moves on the grade falling a bit and how that wasn't fair, it wasn't my fault, because my friends got a better grade, rather than on the realization is, you went and did something that, in many cases, certainly in my experience, has had you crying in my office because you're terrified of it, and you've gone and done something that actually got very close to winning an actual contract. And you're in your third year of university, doing the type of work and bringing together the type of strategic and creative insight that many professionals would struggle to do. So I think there are some real issues, I think, with this kind of endless concern about status being the equivalent of competition. I think that some of the more, so there's plenty of competition in a sense at the universities, whether it's productive.
And it might be on the wrong focus on grades.
It might be on the wrong, I think it is on the wrong focus, except that there are also positive benefits to that, right? If people are interested in their grade, they are going to do the work, but they're increasingly more worried about being given the process, to get the grade. So to give you an example, when I asked undergraduate students who've effectively done what our postgraduates did for you, they don't expect to have the experience which they should have, which is really, well, the client's briefed you, go and deliver. There isn't any extra, right? They want to basically come in and sit in my office to make sure they're going to get their grade. And therefore they want more insights, and whether this way they're going is the right way, and so on. And so in the end, the whole thing falls down, because you basically sit and you watch your work being presented to you, often presented very confidently, often presented very well by very likable people. But you think, well, how much of that was a real world experience? And it goes back to my point earlier, is that there are limits to what I can do in any institution to perfectly mimic. Because we're also a business, and we also have customers, and we also have different sets of pressures. So I think that is kind of an issue. I think one of the things you raised, though, is that in your industry, you're receiving graduates that have very good technical skills, but aren't exposed to lots of other things. And I think this is a part of a problem of kind of the Anglo educational system, which is highly specialized, so that increasingly you're getting people who are in media studies not exposed to the types of disciplines that tell them the reason why they're doing the types of things they're doing, right? So it's great if we have, I used to have advertising graduates who didn't understand integrated marketing communications, which is the more strategic view of why you're doing advertising in the first place, and how therefore you put together a campaign is coherent and on brand and all of those types of things. So they come out with quite brilliant concepts, but no reason really why. And they can rattle off 28, 30 brilliant concepts in as many minutes, but there's still no understanding of how do I respond to a brief and why would I be doing this? And this is, I think, partly because we've become so specialised in what we teach at a degree level, and that we've lost some of the important
broad strokes.
I mean, I'm not going to call them cross-disciplinary, because I don't think they are cross-disciplinary. I think they're just they're so narrow. If degrees in media studies are so narrow that they're teaching technical skills that, as you say, are going effectively to become obsolete, but they're not teaching, business-related skills, and then whacking that in an employability-related skills. And some of the employability-related skills are going to have to get more subtle. So having the ability to work out which students are likely, when I do, hear about my colleagues in fashion, I have very good friends in fashion. I mean, because they're integrated and working with them in studios all the time, they know the students that are going to go to Ted Baker and just cut, a certain pair of pants and work within a very strict brand framework. And they know the students that would die in that environment are going to come and create their own label. And so the advice that gets given and the avenues that they get pointed down changes, but yet they still don't get some of the skills that they would actually therefore need to operate a business, versus the ones that are going to go into the Ted Bakers of the world and the TJ Maxxes of the world and so on, that don't really in a way need those skills for that particular role. They can get those a bit later. So I think there's lots of kind of issues in there. There's the issues about not having enough interaction with people to work out what might be best for them, and the sheer numbers sometimes works against that as well as the other pressures we have. But then also this very narrow focus around certain sets of skills without the whole idea that university education is there to prepare you for a job. I think you can just go so far with that you end up saying, well, we're preparing you for the job as it was 3 or 4 years ago. When you come out, that may have changed, and yet we could have actually exposed you to a few things in there that would actually assist you to go, well, okay, so I need to learn some new software, but I at least know what I'm doing, from a business point of view, so that I can go and actually do that. I think that's where it's problematic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating area, and I think, well, thank you for your time. I think we could probably sit here all day and talk about it, and I appreciate your openness, and I know I'm asking some sort of silly questions and some challenging questions. I think ultimately the biggest thing I've learned over the last 18 years I've built my career is that, if in doubt, it's been those basic 50, 100 life skills, that Gran and Granddad taught me. Always say thank you for whatever you were, kind of given the opportunity for, or send a card, or, and these little things. And now as a business owner, it's just amazing how many opportunities these unlock, and also how many opportunities I see people miss. Because one, they've maybe not been taught to recognize an opportunity, and two, when it comes along, it's not seen as the fictional opportunity in their mind that they thought they would have at this stage, and so they want to get on to the next thing, not realizing that small companies are the stepping stones to the big opportunities in the big companies quite frequently, and also they're your employer in 10 years time when you've come through that big company and you decide you want a life maybe somewhere else where you're not in the bubble of London and you're not in these stressful places as much. And so I have just had concern, really, when I've seen this. So I'm sure it's changing. It seems like there's lots of different sides to this problem. And I think for anyone listening to this, I think we're up to about 4 viewers now. So that's great. I think ultimately it's important that the questions keep being asked by the listener of, what am I not being taught? What is it in my career that people who have already been there and done it are telling me they have learnt between now and their age? If you're between 16 and 24 and you're listening to this, go and find the person in your industry, 30, 32, 40, 50, 60, 70, doesn't matter how old, go and find them and ask them, what do I need to know to get to that point? Because as industries change and technology changes industry, jobs are going to change, and I think people are going to have to become much more dynamic, and learning how you learn is one of the most important things. Knowing how you best take in information is key, but also having those fundamental foundations of skills, in employability skills is key in my opinion, and then you layer upon top of those. So don't discount those. And I think when you do go and you speak to those people who are older, frequently you will hear them say things like, well, actually, my job role has changed 10 times over the last 20 years, but it was, and then there'll be these basic common themes. So keep asking questions of your lecturers like Mike, because they've been there and they've done that and they're a wealth of knowledge. But I think Mike would probably finally agree that without employability skills, you're not going to be that employable no matter what industry you go into. So keep discovering those, and they're free basically. They're things that your mum and your dad and your friends can tell you have been there and done it. Any final points, Mike, whilst to stop me rambling on?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up that, I mean, I think I have to be fair. I think the universities, or certainly a lot of universities, are not unaware of this issue, and I think it's something we struggle with. But we do talk about it a lot, and we do talk about it formally and informally, and constantly trying to think about how we can balance up some of these things. And some people don't want to balance them up. It's either or, and I think the institutions themselves are getting to a point where they're trying to work out, well, how do we kind of square the circle a little bit? How do we put these things together in a way that doesn't just produce graduates that are prepared for jobs 5 years ago, but are able to do some of the things you've mentioned, like learning how to learn, constant lifelong learning, critical reflection, the types of deeper level things that mean they can transcend particular practices or technological advances and obsolescence. And I think, there's obviously stuff we can do a lot better, some of the basics that maybe we have just taken for granted as a generation, and perhaps haven't realised, that have fallen away a little bit, or treat as too trivial, but need to think a lot more creatively ourselves about how we can institutionalise some of those things, and embody them rather than necessarily put them in formal classes and the types of things we've often tried that often don't really seem to satisfy businesses or seem to really work and deliver. And I think we do owe it to our students to do that, because we are taking a position, the whole sector's been taking a position for a long time, that a degree is a good investment. So we are speaking the language of finance and return on investment, and therefore I think we are obligated to, it's not necessarily a language I agree with, but if we're going to speak that language, we're obligated to follow up.
Well, yeah, and that word return on investment, I think, is probably going to become more hot on the lips of a lot of graduates over the next 5-10 years. Have I seen a return on my investment, and what was that? And we'll leave it there. We could talk all day. Mike's off back to Australia now after 6 years in Blighty. I think we're hopefully going to meet for a coffee when I'm in Melbourne in 12 months' time. So maybe we can continue the conversation then. And thanks a lot for your time.
You're welcome.